If you are a beginner and you struggle to upshift in a manual transmission, there is literally one thing holding you back. And this is gonna make your upshift smooth forever, okay? Guaranteed. As soon as you implement this tip, you will realize how easy it is to upshift in a manual car. And the one thing that's stopping you from having smooth upshifts is using your gas and clutch at the same time. You have probably been taught to release the clutch first when you upshift, right? Release your clutch slowly until it hits the bite point, and then once the engine has fully engaged, then you can add the gas to accelerate. But the problem with that is, when you release the clutch first and you don't add throttle, your car is gonna go into engine braking. Why is that? Because once the clutch has fully engaged, your engine has a tendency to want to go back to neutral, right? That's how its inertia works. So then if you don't use the gas and clutch at the same time when you're upshifting, your car is gonna go into this weird mode where it rocks back first because it wants the engine brake, but then you are adding throttle to accelerate it. And that is not good. That's gonna be a very jerky experience for not only the driver but also for the passenger. Now instead, when you release the clutch, if you also add some throttle at the same time, now the car doesn't go into engine braking anymore, because when you reach the bite point and the engine connects to the flywheel, whatever, when you add throttle, you're allowing the car to keep accelerating. So then it's gonna be a very smooth experience. You're always accelerating. You're not accelerating and then when you upshift, your car has to engine brake a bit and then it accelerates again. No. You accelerate the whole time when you're upshifting. You're still doing the same thing with your clutch. You're still doing the same thing with your left foot. You are releasing the clutch to the bite point so then you can reconnect the engine to the wheels. But now you're also adding throttle at the same time. So it cuts this awkward gap between you trying to reconnect the engine and you getting back to the acceleration. Because how a lot of us were taught when we're upshifting, or just changing gears in general, is we need to split the bite point and engine re-engagement and the acceleration separately for some reason, right? We're always taught, and you know this, we were always taught, change gears, engine is connected after the bite point, now get on the throttle. That is such bad shifting advice, because you don't need to do that. You can simultaneously do these actions together. When you upshift, your engine doesn't take that long to re-engage after the bite point. So if you try to think about it in steps and re-engage the engine with the bite point first and then add the throttle, you're gonna have a very awkward gap. And that's when the engine braking jerk occurs before you try to get back on the throttle when you're accelerating. And this also works really well when you are upshifting and you know that the RPMs is way above where it's supposed to be for the next gear, for the higher gear. You will see this problem a lot in modern manual cars because they have this issue called rev-hang. Rev-hang is essentially when you have put your car into neutral or you have disengaged the engine from the flywheels, but the RPMs isn't dropping, right? Hence, that's why it's called rev-hang. The RPMs doesn't want to drop. It stays where it is for an extended period of time before it actually starts dropping, and that's very awkward when you're trying to upshift. Now your RPMs is going to be way above where it's supposed to be, and we don't want that. When we're upshifting, we want the RPMs to drop as soon as possible so we can re-engage in the higher gear. However, there is a way around this. Now what you can do is you can wait a very long time for the RPMs to get back to where it's supposed to be, and then you release the clutch. But let's be honest, no one's gonna do that, right? It's gonna take way too long. You're gonna hold up traffic behind you when you're upshifting, especially if you go from first to second, and it makes things really awkward for you in traffic. What you can do instead is when you release the clutch, you obviously add throttle, like I've already said, to smooth out your upshift, but you actually add throttle with more pressure than you usually do if you realize that the RPMs is way above where it's supposed to be for your higher gear. I'm not so sure why it works, how it smooths out the upshift, but I believe it's something to do with your throttle continuing the momentum that you have built when you engage the bite point, and the RPMs is way above where it's supposed to be, right? Your car would tend to lurch forward, but if you add more throttle to account for it, it'll actually smooth out the process. It continues on your momentum and your car will just keep accelerating as usual, even with an RPM higher than where it wants to be, which always happens when you're upshifting with rev-hang. So not only does this work well when you're trying to combat rev-hang in modern day cars, it also works really well if you want to shift faster, right? Even if your car doesn't have rev-hang, if you want to shift really quick, especially when you're shifting in the lower gears where the RPM difference is very large, you don't want to wait that long. You can just release the clutch at the bite point and add more throttle, and it will work. Guaranteed, it'll smooth out your shift so much, and you will know what I'm talking about because you've had that moment where the RPMs is way too high for your higher gear, and it's just awkward for you to shift your car because you feel that weird lurch where your car wants to lurch forward because the RPM is too high, and then it jerks backwards because now that the engine has settled, the car doesn't want to lurch forward anymore, and it's just a really weird feeling. But yeah, I know the guys who have driven a lot of manuals, they know this feeling when the RPM's too high and they're just nodding their head going, yeah, I know what this guy's talking about. But that's all I wanted to say for this video. If you're a beginner out there trying to smooth out your upshifting and you don't know why your upshifts aren't smooth, I guarantee you it is what I'm talking about in the video. Make sure you add some gas as you release the clutch on your upshift. Do not ever separate your clutch and gas from each other. They always work in unison. When one goes up, the other one goes down. When the clutch goes up, the gas goes down. You will be very smooth with your driving, especially your upshifts. Anyway, hope you found it helpful, and I'll see you in the next one. As always, happy driving.